seeing the U.S. and a lot of the coalition forces in all these different areas. And to me, it seems like they're provoking these countries, or it kind of looks like they're pushing for war. I mean, do you see the same thing where they're pushing for some type of war?
What I see, Dave, is the Anglo-American financial edifice bowing up to constituents in the world that have been posing a threat or slash alternative to the financial hegemony of the U.S. dollar in trade settlement. The primary adversaries of America slash NATO has been China slash Russia, who, in my view, are sick of having the American fraudulent dollar settlement hegemony shoved down their throats. This has led them to erect parallel structures to the old institutions like the World Bank and the IMF that prop up U.S. dollar hegemony, and this has been accomplished by the creation of different structures that are the comparable in the land of the BRICS countries to the IMF and the World Bank. So in retaliation for this, we've seen a lot of thumping of chest and a lot of posturing and a lot of mucky muck being imposed by the occupied United States government and their enforcement arm, which is the U.S. military. That's the way I see it, from a very high level.
Now, you just said something about them setting up their own payment systems, their own systems separate and apart from the dollar. Do you think they realize that the dollar is at its end game, and this is why they're doing this at this point?
In a very short, terse answer, yes. That's exactly what's going on, and the reason why this is the way it is because I want to say the stewardship that America has shown as the conservator of the world's reserve currency has been so extremely poor, so extremely corruptly managed, and so disingenuously applied and maintained that the rest of the world has had little choice but to make preparations to effectively abandon the dollar in trade settlement. And to me, it's an inevitable outcome that we will all live to see one way or another. And whether this means we end up in a global war, I think is largely going to be up to the sociopaths who are running the Western military-industrial complex, because in my view, the rest of the world isn't going to sit back idly and be cowed and bullied by a group of fraudulent criminal sociopaths that have occupied the vestiges of power in the Western world.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to take this, and we're talking about the dollar collapsing and stuff, and we're seeing the stock market right now. I mean, we're seeing fluctuations. We're seeing it drop one day, get pumped up the next day, and we're continually seeing this. I mean, yesterday we saw it drop. Today we're seeing that it's okay. They're blaming everything on China. I mean, what do you make of all this? Why is this all happening right now?
Well, Dave, just to back up for a second before we address the real question, we're seeing a lot of finger pointing, like we're seeing Russia be blamed for what's going on in the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. We're seeing, a host of different actors, strangely enough, vis-a-vis Syria and destabilization there, and Libya and destabilization there, and Egypt and destabilization there, and all of these destabilizations that I just mentioned. These have all been architected or engineered by basically NGOs, American-based, whether it's Soros. They've been funded and armed by the U.S. military, The whole Al Qaeda, ISIS, the extremist part of the of the Muslim entity is a creation of U.S. intelligence to begin with. So yeah, they like to point fingers at everyone but themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if you want to just go back and revisit the words of Victoria Nuland as the Undersecretary of State regarding developments in the Ukraine, where Victoria Nuland had to say to one of her co-workers in the Ukrainian realm that proposed American activities in the Ukraine might not be received very well in Europe, and her response, which was recorded by Russian intelligence, her response was "F Europe." So, I mean, America has been acting on the world stage of F everybody, and this is not conducive to good global or international relations. And this, in my view, anyway, in my humble opinion, is symptomatic of a failed foreign policy, of a failed state, of something that's so utterly backwards and wrong and criminal that I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. They've left the rest of the world with little chance but to galvanize and stand against it, and that's exactly what we're seeing happen. And I think you had a more direct point in this line of reasoning, which seems to escape me right now because I'm sorry I got sidetracked on a bit of a diatribe there, and I didn't mean to. Could you refresh my memory?
I'm just talking about the stock market and how we're seeing the fluctuations right now.
Oh yes, yeah, Dave. The stock market. What we're witnessing, what we have a ringside seat to in the stock market, is the varying degrees of success and failure of the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, also known as the Plunge Protection Team. You see, the real reason we're seeing all this is that the stock markets are in bubble valuations. They've been in bubble valuations for a very long time. The only reason that they're at these valuations is because interest rates were engineered and forced to zero, and multiple rounds of declared and undeclared quantitative easing, which is also known as money printing. So we've seen the currency of the realm, namely the U.S. dollar, debased like no other currency in the world has ever been debased. Other prominent economic blocks around the world, whether it's the euro, the yen, have joined in force and acted in a coordinated fashion to jump onto the QE train, along with the people that have occupied the U.S. financial entity, the Treasury, and it's a race. It's sometime in economics when there's competitive devaluations of currencies, they call it a race to the bottom, and it's basically it's a competition to see who can devalue their currency the most. And while this has been happening, there's one side of the coin that says if you print enough money, the stock market will go up no matter what. And then there's another side of the coin that says if you debase the currency enough, you effectively choke off economic activity, which is very negative for stocks. But the one thing that stands or historically has stood through all of this kind of mayhem in all cases in economic history has been that when these type of conditions have presented themselves in the past, precious metals have stood tall. And precious metals have been prevented from standing tall in our current environment because we have insane amounts of naked shorting of precious metals through exchanges like the LBMA and the COMEX in New York, where the amount of silver being sold in paper form exceeds the amount of silver that's mined on the planet in a year. For instance, in silver, such a condition where more than a year's mine supply has been sold in paper form, there's no commodity on the planet where this has ever occurred before, or where this would be tolerated. Because in commodities trading, there is commodities law, and commodities law states that this sort of activity should never and could never occur. But the fact that we have American regulators turning a blind eye to these abusive practices tells us that the regulatory arm is complicit in U.S. government action to effectively kill the canary or squelch the voice of the canary in the coal mine. Because in an economic sense, Dave, it's historically been a rapidly rising price of physical precious metal that has been the sound that the currency is being seriously debased and defiled. And the powers that be, these sociopaths, these Keynesian-minded world reshapers have decided in their wisdom, misguided wisdom, as they cloak themselves in the flag and wrap themselves in the false paradigm of national security, that they have seen fit to overturn the basic tenets of economics and to cast them to the wind. Much in the same way they've cast your Constitution aside in favor of a police state, while usurping the liberties and the constitutional rights of Americans.
Right. We discussed this before the interview, where the U.S. really is pushing the police state out to pretty much all the countries. And we can see that other countries are starting to take on the same thing, where they're putting soldiers on the street, they're removing the rights, they're having searches, and they're doing all of this right now, all at the same time. I mean, in Australia, in France, in Canada, Belgium, UK, we see it happening all over the place. And we see that they're really getting ready. It looks to me like they're getting ready to control what is coming. I mean, do you see the same thing?
Yeah. Well, Dave, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I went to my second Major League Baseball game of the year last night. My first one was early in the spring, and when Boston was in town to play Toronto, and I went to that game, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. But between the game I went to in the spring and the game I went to last night, the American League has instituted new security procedures at all Major League Baseball parks, and I was subject to being in a lineup like cattle for over a half hour to go through security, where you had to empty your pockets and have someone rifle through, for the women, people rifling through your handbags and emptying your pockets, walk through a metal detector. And all I can tell you is my view of what was transpiring was ludicrous. It's ineffective. Anybody who would have any intentions of causing harm at an event like that, this would have absolutely, in my view, little to zero effect in stopping them. And what it really is it's teaching us all to be submissive, and it's basically slave training or prisoner training, in my view. And these, metal detectors at sporting events, in my view, and this sort of This has all been dictated by Homeland Security. Um, uh, Homeland Security, in my view, is anything but Homeland
Mm-hmm.
Security. It's Homeland oppression. And what I can say after seeing this last night I attended the last American League Baseball game I will ever attend, and I'm left with the conclusion that America's biggest export now is the police state. America exports police state to the rest of the world. That's what America stands for. That's what America is now known for in international markets. And that's why the world is now galvanizing against the people who have occupied America and taken over its leadership in a stealth coup.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean, we see all this happening right now, and we see what's happening in the markets. We see what's happening in the economy. A lot of people are talking about the Shemitah, the 7-year cycle. I mean, they're saying this September right now, we're going to see something happen. We're not sure, or maybe it'll lead into later in the fall or the winter. We're hearing from Jim Sinclair. He's talking, yes, this is going to happen. I mean, what's your view on this? Do you think that this crash is about ready to explode?
Well, what I see, Dave, is it's I've always found it difficult, and I've tried to refrain from putting dates
Mm-hmm.
on traumatic events in the market. But what I can see is extremely dark clouds. I see dark clouds that, in my experience, have produced very, very violent thunderstorms, have produced tornadoes, has produced carnage, and the skies, in an economic sense, keep getting darker. And to think that something very, very traumatic and dangerous could come out of this is not a stretch anymore. I don't think it's fear porn anymore. And it's what we can see now visibly on the horizon is telling me that it's very likely a very smart time to think about taking shelter, and just what shelter entails in this day and age from a financial perspective is maybe debatable between different people who are thinking clearly about this. But we're in for some very, very rough sailing here.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, what exactly do you see coming? Like, what can people expect to see or feel when this thing hits?
What I expect to see, frankly, is I do think that we have a hyperinflationary event in our future. I think that people want to probably have some provisions, whether it's some storable food. They might want to have a means to protect all this. And I think that we're likely to see financial assets have their values savaged. I think we're likely to see precious metals break the shackles of the suppressive endeavors of the Anglo-American banking complex. I think we're likely to see those shackles broken in the relatively possibly near future. I think we're going to see exchanges like COMEX and LBMA in good time. We will see them fail. We will see them settle. We will see them settle position holders in cash. People who think they have exposure to real metal are gonna find out, I do believe, in one fell swoop, that they were just subject to part of the fraud, and they're going to end up with a pile of fiat dollars that won't buy them a whole lot of anything. And I think the people that are going to be left sitting as pretty as any from a financial perspective are going to be the people that actually have and can put their hands on physical precious metal. So I'm a huge believer in owning physical precious metal. And when I say owning precious metal, I think it's best that you have it where you can literally put your hands on it in short time, and know it's yours. Because if you don't own it, if you can't touch it, you don't own it. That's kind of sort of my view on that.
So for the everyday person on the street, their way of life is going to completely change when this whole thing comes crumbling down.
I absolutely believe that to be the case.
So those people who are out there working their 9-to-5 jobs, doing whatever they're doing every single day, this is kind of going to come to a screeching halt. I mean, we kind of saw a glimmer of it in 2008, and moving 7 years now since that date, I mean, things have just gotten worse. They really haven't gotten any better. It's an illusion that everything's gotten better. But when you talk about dark clouds, a tornado, thunderstorm, I mean, the everyday man or woman on the street, they're not going to be doing the same thing they've been doing yesterday. Things are going to radically change for them.
Well, I'll even take it a little step further, stepping outside the realm of financial goings on. Mm-hmm. It sure seems to me that there are powers within the United States that are trying to foment or induce a race war in the United States, and this is an extremely sad development. But I see from the very highest levels in America right now, I see serious attempts to race bait. I see serious attempts to sensationalize black on white, black on Mexican, Mexican on white, white on whoever. I see absolutely the fingerprints and the footprints. You see of attempts to balkanize the public, and the footprints, are Sasquatch sized. Like, they're hard to miss, unless you are literally living in a vacuum and consuming all of your news from MSNBC or CNN. The entrails of what I just said are unmistakably present, and this is another serious development, because you see this also explains why the police state apparatus has been erected around us, because and why people are being trained to be good prisoners, because it sure seems that racially America is being baited or positioned to have a very, very serious eruption on the racial front, and it's being absolutely planned at the highest levels, and it's being instituted and revved up by the media. The media are clearly complicit with leadership. And it's really an ugly situation.
Yes, it is. I mean, we do see this, and every time something happens, it does seem like it's being pushed. And a lot of people talk about this being pushed where they can kind of maybe enact martial law, or, get rid of the Constitution, or suspend the Constitution, I should say.
Officially, as opposed to just having done it anyway.
Right. And it officially come out in the corporate media, where the president can finally say, okay, we had to suspend the Constitution because what's going on here. And it does seem like they're trying to start these little protests, the riots, and they want it to spread across the country.
Sure, and the media has been fanning the flames.
Yes, they have.
Cheerleading.
And it seems like they just can't get it started. I mean, they try, they have the agent provocateurs pushing it, and they try, and it just doesn't seem like they can get it off the ground. But it doesn't mean they're not going to continually try, because they won't stop. They would rather have the Constitution completely suspended by announcing it. This way they can do whatever they have to do. And we can just take a look at Ukraine and all the other countries and look at the people there under the rule of these puppet governments. I mean, they really don't have freedom there. Even though the U.S. was telling them they were fighting for democracy, there is no democracy, there is no freedom or the rights of the people. And we definitely see that here in Canada now, in Australia, and the rest of the Eurozone. I mean, we see the same exact thing. They're preparing and getting ready.
Yes, and you know what, Dave? Also, just to point out, because I know when you start talking about these kind of things, it can sound like a bashing exercise at times.
Yes.
And I also want to say that the reason why these sociopaths haven't been successful to date is because there exists within the American people a core of decency, and a core of people who are still very, very committed to the Constitution, even though leadership has done their utmost to cast it aside. And average rank and file Americans are good people. And good people are usually very, very loath to subject themselves or commit or be taken down the drain by people who are increasingly becoming very clearly the sociopaths, that we're talking about. So, I guess to a point, you got to have faith in good people to hope that this can be diverted or stymied or rebuffed. And that's kind of sort of what I'm hoping for, and that's kind of sort of what I'm betting on, because you know what, free people are really hard to take down.
I agree with you. Listen, Rob, thank you very much for coming on the X22 Report Spotlight. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure being with you.